My name's Jeremiah Trinnell, and I'm sitting down with our state representative for in the House of Representatives,
Kay
Kay
Christofferson, District 56, which covers Lehigh, American Fork, and a little bit of Highland. And I've been a representative for 9 years.
9 years, awesome. And you've been re-elected how many times?
This is my 5th term.
So your 5th term.
So I have a little more than a year left of my 5th term.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Is there a limit to how many terms a representative has?
No.
No
limit. So no.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't abuse that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
most people get old before they can keep going. Right?
There's been occasionally a senator or a representative that's gone 30 years plus,
mm-hmm.
but that's okay too. Once in a while, it's nice to have somebody that has some historical background of what's gone on in the legislature to give us some context.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people last about, I would say, 6 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not bad for a cycle. About 6 years, I would think.
It's a little bit tough because it takes a couple of years to really get your feet under you
mm-hmm.
and learn the ropes and understand the players and the organizations, mm-hmm. and it's a learning curve. So I think it's good for people to be in a little longer,
mm-hmm.
just because they're a little more effective that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, I want to start off with a little bit of an introduction to who you are. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of what you've done in a brief fashion of your life, and maybe a little bit about who you are? And
okay, sure. I was born in 1956 in Lehigh, here in Lehigh,
mm-hmm.
so in the Lehigh Hospital, which was on State Street. And since then, it's been torn down since then, but I've seen Lehigh grow from maybe 3,000 people to, I think there's close to 70,000 now, plus everything out west, Eagle
mm-hmm.
Mountain and Saratoga Springs. And so it's been interesting to watch the growth, and with that growth, it's brought some challenges here.
Mm-hmm.
But and some opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I graduated from Lehigh High School. I was involved in shop and
mm-hmm.
basketball and track and some other
mm-hmm.
sports, and then went on a mission to Buenos Aires, Argentina,
mm-hmm.
for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and
mm-hmm.
then after that I went to BYU, attended BYU in civil engineering, and graduated
mm-hmm.
in 1982. In 81 I married Suzanne Duncan, and we've had 7 children, and now we have
that's very nice. Like, I myself come from a big family, but one thing. So you've spent a good portion of your adult life, your career, doing civil engineering.
Yeah, and construction, and I graduated in civil engineering, and I started working for Geneva Rock, which is part of the Clyde companies, and we do civil type construction work, roads, excavation,
mm-hmm.
Building products, and I was the vice president of construction for Geneva Rock, and then I went to work for a sister company, Sunrock, and at the time Sunrock was lumber products and masonry block.
Mm-hmm.
We had sand and gravel, concrete, and excavation grading. So kind of a mix of things. It was a non-union company versus Geneva Rock that was
mm-hmm.
a union company. And then and then later we split Sunrock into two groups, Sunrock Corporation and Sunrock Building Materials.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, Sunrock Building Materials is SunPro, and I was the president of Sunrock Corporation.
Yeah, I myself, I've worked at Burton Lumber, which is a similar business to SunPro. So forklifts in the lumber yard and shipping material out to job sites to be built. Yeah.
So our sister company did that, SunPro, and then I was at Geneva Rock for 23 years, and then another 9 years for an intermediate company, H.E. Davis, which became part of Sunrock, and then when I retired, I was president of Sunrock. So 32 years there, and then I was involved after that in buying and fixing up some rental homes. So I did that with several homes, and about a year after I started doing that, I had a friend call me up and said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to run in this house district. Are you interested?" And I had been interested in issues and that, but never really wanted to campaign.
What was the thing that happened?
Just a friend called me up and said, "We're looking for somebody to fill a spot in the District 56 to run for that." They had just done redistricting, changed all the boundaries. This district split into 3 districts, and Ken Sumption preceded me, and he ran for governor, so it left 3 open seats in this area. So
it kind of gave you a little bit of an opportunity to take it.
Yeah, there was someone else running, and my friend just said we just want another choice, and so I said, "Well, if you can help me campaign, I'll jump in and try it." So it was a learning curve. It was a big learning curve. I went down and filed that day, and I think there was only a few days left to wrap up the filing period there, and then that was like on a Tuesday. That Saturday, I was at a political open house here in North Lehigh at a charter school, and the governor was there, and those who were running for attorney general. So all the statewide offices were being debated and discussed and presented at that meeting, and I was kind of like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. So I had a table and was able.
Did you have kind of a mentor to kind of guide you through it?
Yeah, the person that talked me into it has been in politics a little bit, so he helped me out. I just barely made it through the caucus convention, but after that I built some momentum and
got a little bit more experience.
Yeah, and then by the time the primary came around, I was able to get 60% of the vote, so that worked out good.
That is good. Now, one of the things that interests me is particularly part of what you do for the state. You are on the State Federalism Commission, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Could you explain a little bit of what that is?
Okay, yeah, a lot of people don't understand what federalism is, and basically it's where's the line between the federal government and the states. You know, when the national government was formed, it was formed by the states, and the states were concerned about the overpowering central government, which they had just gone through with in England, Great Britain, and they fought a revolution over that, and so they wanted to be very careful not to give too much power to the central government, and so federalism is kind of like states' rights. What does the Constitution allow? What authority does the Constitution give the federal government versus all of the rest that goes to the states or to the individual?
I believe that in the Constitution, the amendment, I forget the number, but it says that all the rights that are not explicitly given to the federal government are given respectively to the states and or the people.
Right.
And that's something I've been very interested about, especially recently with a lot of misunderstanding on how the government works necessarily. And part of why I'm interested in talking to you is because you are on that, I was curious as to directly the relationship between the state government and the federal government. And researching a little bit of maybe some issues that you guys were about to talk about or have. I'm not sure exactly when, but there was President Biden issued an executive order 3030. It was basically to preserve or conserve some of the land.
30% of the land by 2030.
Yeah, by 2030. And it is the year 2021 right now. And I'm more interested in, I was like, that's another discussion on the president signing executive orders, many executive orders. But I want to talk about how that affects us in the states and how that interacts with the state government.
Well, already the federal government owns 67% of Utah. BLM and Forest Service. And so 67% is owned by the federal government, plus the state owns some land, counties own some land, cities own some land. I think there's only about 25% of the land that is privately owned that can be taxed. And that's a disadvantage to the state, where you can't receive that tax money to support government purposes. And the federal government ties that up, and they do give us payment in lieu of taxes, which is PILT, but it is really substandard compared to, it's really not in lieu of taxes, because it should be at least 4 times what it is, and we think it should be closer to 10 times what they're giving us to be comparable to the taxes that you would get from the value of land currently. And so that's a real disadvantage to the states out west, especially Utah, you know. And so if you do a 30 by 30, it's like, well, does that mean we're going to get 37% of our land back? Because, you know, we're already giving our fair share of land to the federal government, and the intent originally was, as states were formed, the federal government took ownership to clear the title, and then they would give the land back to the states, and that happened all the way from the East Coast to about where the Mountain West is now. And in 1976,
because there was that period of history where they're basically giving land out to whoever could claim it.
Well,
but then after that, they stopped doing that and not giving the land that the future states were becoming.
They'd give it out or they'd sell it or whatever, but that was the point. They would sell it, they would use that money to pay off some of the debts of the federal government. Originally it was to pay off the debt of the Revolutionary War. And then in 1976, all of a sudden Congress decided, hey, we need to look at conservation and not give this land back. And so, you know, Nevada, I think close to...
Could we just maybe talk a little bit about what that word means? Conservation.
Yeah.
Now, when I first hear that, I immediately think of protecting the environment. But I get the impression that that's not entirely what that is.
That's part of it. They're just saying we want to conserve it from private use so that everybody can use it. But the problem is the federal government is putting restrictions on federal lands. They're starting to take out any access roads. There's no way you can even use the property. They're limiting grazing rights or even other recreation opportunities. And so they're not only conserving it, but they're tying up the use of it.
Within their legal system as opposed to our legal system. Would that be a fair...
I'm not sure what you mean by their legal system.
By taking up the roads and within the federal land, if anyone wanted to get access to it, you're dealing with the federal government rather than the state government.
Right.
And in that sense, you're dealing not
on
directly
the
to locally county or state law. You're dealing with federal law.
Yeah. And the question is what gives the federal government authority to do that? And if they can do that, what can't they do? And you see now almost everything that the states do, the federal government can overrule them or trump them in whatever they do. So, for example, education. There's no allowance for the federal government to run education for the states. That's the state's responsibility. Yet the federal government is taking taxes for education and stipulating demands on what's taught or how things are handled in education. Same with healthcare. Same with some transportation projects, and almost everything we do as a state, the federal government is trying to involve themselves. And the crazy thing is the thing that the federal government should be doing, the things that, like immigration, they're doing a terrible job. And military.
I mean, there's been some very recent examples of some, I would say, incompetence is the word I would use for some recent events in Afghanistan. But your point being is the things that they are written out that they are supposed to be in charge of, they are not being good stewards of.
Right.
And in many senses, their efforts are invading on the federalized idea of, I'm not saying that very well, that our own state sovereignty to affect our own laws and our own governance here.
Yeah, and so what's happening is we're starting to become a system that the founders fought a revolutionary war over, and the tyrants of England who were involved in the day-to-day lives of the colonies, we're finding that it's happening now, and that's what we didn't want to have happen. And so now we're saying, look, federal government, if you take care of your responsibilities and focus on that, you can deal with it. You don't need to be dealing with everything that we do in the states. We can handle that. We need your help, we'll let you know. But I think that they really overstep their bounds in a lot of areas, and it's coming back to haunt them because they just can't do all that stuff. It's not they're not set up to do that, and they don't do a very good job of it.
Yeah, well, I thank you very much for describing all that. But many times when I hear things like this, I often ask myself, what is something that somebody could do about that? If I wanted to preserve my local right to represent and have a closer relationship with the governance that is being administered to me and my neighbors. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this interview, was create an understanding of what the state does. because without that, I don't know how to even begin to understand how to even know what the state's doing.
Well, there's a balance of power that's set up so that, for example, in the national government and in the state government, you have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And those three guard their powers jealously. In other words, if somebody encroaches in their power, they push back. And that was meant to do that so that they would keep one branch from overpowering the other branches, and they're supposed to keep that balance. And on another level, there's the federal government and the states should be pushing back against the federal government to balance that power. And it's hard for 50 states to get together
to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's hard. There's really not a venue to do that. Try to get together for like a convention of states, and that's tough to do because people are all over the chart on that, on how to approach that. But basically, as states, we need to get together and say, okay, what's our authority? How do we keep the federal government in check and keep from becoming a socialist country? And so it's hard to do that. And as a state legislature, we're working on a few things, what we can do. We're one of 50, but we're trying to get other states to join us in saying, okay, first of all, maybe we say, well, if you're, we could sue to get the lands. We could do that. We could go to court and say we have a case that these lands belong to Utah, and we could sue. And we may still do that. Another thing is we're saying, well, in the meantime, you ought to at least pay us
the appropriate level,
the pill payments that are appropriate. And so we've developed a system to say, we know the
what
value
payments
of the
were
land.
the PLIT or something?
Yeah, payment in lieu of taxes.
Okay.
And we've developed a system to say it's a program that takes and values each parcel of land in the state based on surrounding properties, just like you would have an appraiser come in and do it. And you can change some of the variables, and instantaneously you can adjust it and say, what's this property based on the current conditions
and the value of the land.
Yeah, and so we've done that in Utah, and other states are looking at that. But I think what we're saying is we can make a case that PIL payments are a tenth of what they should be on a lower scale, and possibly up to 20%, 20 times. So that's one thing we're doing. We're also working with, Congressman Bishop was involved in federalism issues. He was a good supporter of states' rights, but he's out of office now, and he was one of.
He's one of the stronger pillars.
Yeah, but when you take, he was one of 435 people, and it's hard for one person to carry the ball for the whole country, and so it's tough as states because it's a lot more involved coordinating the message. And the federal government, it's easy for them because the president or the executive branch, they have resources and communication that
they're very centralized.
Yeah.
It's difficult for a decentralized attempt to combat a centralized one, where it's much easier to command the resources that they have.
Right. So there's a lot to overcome, but I think that if people understand the issue and communicate with the governor how important that is, then that encourages the governor
Mm-hmm.
To take the steps to push back a little bit more against the federal government.
Speaking on that, like as those are the issues that you often deal with, what would you want the people across the country, but in Utah specifically, what would you want them to know about that process? Like how they could help you in that instance? Because most people I talk to have a very, very vague idea of what happens and what the issues are that you guys are trying to push through. People understand when there's a fire emergency and how we need to not light the mountains on fire, and we deal with that all the time. But that's not such a very well communicated thing. What would you like people to know how to help you with that?
Well, I mean, just when the federal government manages our land, you know, we need to be able to use the land for
Our water.
for grazing. You know, when we have cattlemen and ranchers grazing on with their cattle on grazing in the mountains, that does a service because it cuts down a lot of the fuel that burns up the mountains. You know, and if we have proper management of our forests, they're not going to burn down and burn whole swaths of the mountain. You know, they might burn from one road to the next or something, but we really ought to be able to get those resources. We ought to, you know, use the timber. If there's dead wood in there, we ought to be able to get it out and get rid of like the pine beetles and things like that. I think we could manage our land a lot better than the federal government because they are just too scattered. They don't really have our best interests at heart. They're just kind of maintaining some things, and they have a lot of red tape to make decisions on things that affect us locally. And it takes months sometimes to get a decision made on things that we could just go right after it and do and take care of our land. Those are some of the things when it comes to land management that we need to deal with. As far as you know, what other things people ought to know is what does it take to make a state, and what were the agreements made when we became a state? What was the Enabling Act?
Yeah.
And what did that entail? And if people read about the Enabling Act, that listed the guidelines of what needed to happen to become a state. That was kind of the agreement with the federal government that said, okay, you can become a state. When you become a state, we have an obligation to turn these lands over to you, just like every other state has gone through. And if you understand the history of that, then you can say, oh, this. You can put it in context and say, this is what they meant. This is what the intention was. And as a state, we're not saying we're going to privatize all the land. We're saying we got to have some of this land that we can manage. We can use it. We want it for public purposes as well as private.
At the discretion of a smaller and more localized.
Yeah, our legislature and the governor. And you know, we have cities that are wrapping around isolated federal land that we can't use for the growth of that city because it's owned by the federal government. Well, the federal government ought to say, look, some of these lands should be.
It just doesn't make
for
sense.
City growth.
It looks like a pox or something on a map.
So that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. We ought to be able to go in, take these isolated islands in this city and say, you know, the federal government, you need to turn those over so that we can grow.
Properly develop our cities to fit. And because I remember not too long ago, the governor, I believe it was Governor Herbert at the time, interviewed a lot of the people in Utah County about, well, not interviewed, but sent out
survey or
a
something?
survey to discuss possible ways of developing the county. Do we concentrate a lot more of the development to build taller, or do we build wider out west, or do we build wider down south? And just to kind of get an idea of that, but that becomes difficult when you have walls and barriers that aren't physical. I mean, we got plenty of those. We also have the legal barriers between the federal and the state government, and that can be incredibly difficult. As you're telling me, to deal with the giant bureaucracy of the federal government.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that I think is incredibly important.
And that was probably Envision Utah that set that out and developing some idea of where the citizens think that Utah should go, is my guess. Is what
that's probably what I saw. I don't know what the result of it was, but just as a way of letting people know kind of what some of the issues are, if we want to develop and grow in a certain way, it's helpful to know what the obstacles are. Because many times the obstacles aren't well presented to us. Because sometimes it's easier to just ignore that as an option.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have a discussion on what's the problem, what are the roadblocks, what are the options, and what's the best way forward. And some people may disagree on the best way forward, but
if we have a better understanding of what all the options and obstacles are, we at least have a better choice.
We can make a decision.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that I think that's pretty important for that. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is I did a brief overview of the demographics in your district, and I noticed that the youth or in school age group is one of the highest in the state, and I wanted to know kind of how that affects the way you perceive your job in the government.
Well, this area is growing pretty fast, and we have young families and big families, and so education is a big part of that. And
aren't we like maybe we're one of the lowest states, if not the lowest states, for the amount of dollars per student, but we're very high on the actual education that people receive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this kind of goes back a little bit to the federal lands. You know, a lot of states get that tax money from those lands to help with education, and we don't have that. And we probably spend a bigger part of our budget on education
than other states.
But the point is, our budget's a lot less, and like you say, our weighted per pupil unit, the money that goes to each student is a lot less than other states, but we get a bigger bang for our buck because we have better scores than most states, and so we have great results, but we just don't have the same amount of money other states do.
It's kind of like what we can do with our water supply out here. Is we don't receive the most water, but we try to be efficient with it. And so, I mean, I feel like that's a very practical lesson that we in the state of Utah learn and continue to learn that is hard to learn in a position more centralized and closer to DC. Is we know how to use our land and manage it a bit more efficiently than somebody in some desk office in DC probably would.
Right. And that's a good analogy. You know, when you're closer to it, you can focus on it and you can use it more wisely and the way it works best for you. And So as we look at the growth around here, I mean, North Utah County and South Salt Lake counties are really growing fast, and you see the development at the point of the mountain and what's going on there. And so
just about every other day I'm talking to somebody new who just moved here from California or from elsewhere.
yeah,
So I mean, we have a large population of native born Utahns, but we also have a very high growth of people moving in from out of state.
they're seeing the opportunities here, and the business, the business environment here is good because we don't have a lot of regulations like California or other states, and people like that. And we have a good workforce who is honest and hardworking and dependable, and companies like that. And we have universities and colleges close by where they
Can source.
can draw on a lot of the talent that we have. And like you say, there's a lot of young people that's that age that are coming through and need jobs and are available. And they like it here. And they like the environment, so they're staying here. A lot of companies are coming in for the resources and the business climate and just the environment. So all that is drawing a lot of people.
Yeah. So as just putting some of the math together, that's part of the reason why the control over our own lands helps with opening up the development for what we see as our growing needs. Because if we have more access to the development of our cities, that, I mean, I live in student housing, and it can be very, very tight. Sometimes it's hard to find a parking spot. But if we have that extra flexibility with our own jurisdiction, then maybe we could alleviate some of those problems for younger students, as well as people who are trying to build their own young families out in their own space.
Right. Yeah. And that's good. Well said. We're one of the most urban states around because people are compacted in smaller areas. And you wouldn't think that, out west we have lots of space in that, but
we do have a lot of space, but we don't have good access to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And then some areas that there is good access, we have a limit. We're limited by the amount of water that's available, so that's a limiting factor. And that's another thing we're trying to do is say, we have available water rights from the Colorado River. Let's use that and solve some of our problems. We could build more dams. That's not real popular, and we don't have a lot of federal government help on that like we used to. But this year we've seen how invaluable our reservoirs have been.
Yeah, I mean, near Gunnison, I believe one of the reservoirs actually dried up.
Yeah.
And so, that's incredibly valuable. Are there other subjects you'd like to talk about?
Well, maybe a little bit about transportation. I'm the chair of the House Transportation Committee, and so I deal a lot with transportation, and that was what I did in my career is transportation. And I think that Utah does a great job with transportation. The Department of UDOT, or the Utah Department of Transportation, is very progressive. They're very good at their job. And when you go to other states, if I've talked to as I've talked to people from other states,
we don't have.
They say how does Utah do it? But UDOT gets along with the metropolitan planning organizations, the MPOs. They get along with UTA. They work together with the cities and counties, and you know, other states look at it and say, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get people to work together? How do you be so efficient with the funds that you have? How do you get so much done? Your roads are looking great, and they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, you were.
Oh, I was what I was thinking of was a meme, where the Utah state flower is the construction cone, where in the spring it starts off as the skinny cone, and as towards the fall it goes to the fat cone. But that's what was just in my head.
Yeah.
But I think it's good that we have good maintenance of our infrastructure.
Mm.
I mean, I've heard many times in the national news of how many parts of our infrastructure is decaying and pretty old. But it's good to see and hear how our infrastructure here is, as well as I can perceive it, pretty good.
Yeah. And it is, and one of the things that we need to kind of be looking forward to is as people adopt electric vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
we've got to adjust because electric vehicles aren't, they pay a little bit for registration fees towards road
Mm-hmm.
maintenance, but it's really only about a third or a half of what regular gas, petroleum based vehicles are paying for their fuel. And so I guess what I'm saying is as more and more
Mm-hmm.
adoption of electric vehicles are made, we're going to have to solve that. And
Mm-hmm.
we've been looking at that. And one of the possible solutions is a road user charge
Mm-hmm.
or a RUC system based on miles driven.
Mm-hmm. Now that's one of that was one of the things that I experienced when I was driving through New York. Is they had many different spots where they had people pay the toll for the road. And I remember thinking to myself and discussing with other people how nice it is that we don't have toll roads here. I mean, we may have one or two, but I don't know where they are.
Well, the HOV lane,
Yeah,
high occupancy
we
vehicle
have that,
lane
but
is a toll road.
but it's free most of the time. From what I've seen, it's labeled free.
Well, when they're doing construction, they'll put free on it,
Mm-hmm.
or they'll suspend the fee. But usually, once the construction's done, the minimum fee is 25 cents from one station
Mm-hmm.
to the next.
Well, that just shows how much I drive on that
Yeah.
on that section of road.
But you're right. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily like toll roads either. But this system would be just say, based on your miles driven, you might pay $200 to $300
Mm-hmm.
a year
And
to drive all of the roads.
Yeah.
Which is a bargain, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an interesting solution that I frankly haven't put much thought into because that wasn't a solution I knew was being discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've found just now super interesting talking to you. Is just maybe that is a solution that we can use. And I wouldn't have known that, not being able to discuss what the issues that we deal with here within our state. And so, thank you.
You bet.
Yeah.
So, there's lots of input on different things, and we discuss that each interim session and during the regular legislative session. We have, if people are interested in finding out what happens in these committees and what's being discussed, they can look on the legislative website. It's le.utah.gov, which is the legislative website, and it has all of the information about the legislature and each member of the House or the Senate talks about it. It has recordings of the committee discussions.
Mm-hmm.
It has the audio and video of the House and the Senate floor debates.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of documents that are provided by our legislative research analysts that give information on different parts of government, things that we're doing. It's amazing the amount of information that is available there that can help people who are interested in finding out more about government, more about a certain issue. Have great search site. You can look at all the bills and learn about the fiscal notes of the bills. You can learn about where it, during the session you can see where the bill is and it advances as it advances and where it stops. If it's voted down, then it shows the vote and who voted for it and who voted against it. So a lot of good information there.
Yeah, well, that's very good to have. Part of the reason why I'm doing this again is to create awareness of what is there, because I don't know all this information, but I enjoy learning, and I enjoy more specifically learning what the issues are in relation to people, because maybe I don't care so much about the numbers all the time. I mean, I do, but a lot of times I care more about the reasoning and the why. Like, why do we need more of the federal land? Oh, it's because we believe we need more of it for our own use, for our own development. And so, thank you very much for that. I don't know how to end this.
Well, it's been a pleasure to
Yeah.
talk to you, and as you look into this and other subjects come up, you're welcome to talk to me or other legislators who are involved in those issues. We'd probably be glad to talk to you and discuss that.
Well, I'm gonna put this out there for people to see, and I would love to get some feedback on how to do this better.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.